About the three artists. So the show, as you know, three Graces, Polly Apfelbaum, Tony Fair, and Carrie Moyer. The Graces have been, their names have been associated with a number of different things. So starting in the same order as I mentioned their names, Aglaia, Euphrosyne, and Thalia, they've been called Beauty, Good Cheer, Festivities, Splendor, Mirth, Good Cheer, Beauty, Mirth, Abundance, Charm, Beauty, Creativity, Elegance, Mirth, and Youth, etc., etc. There isn't really a defined adjective that goes along with them, although beauty seems to be pretty consistent. So for this show, Elizabeth has chosen Beauty, Wonder, and Joy. And I think all of the artists that are in this exhibition really encompass those three adjectives, but for my money, I kind of think that each one of them corresponds to one in particular. So this is just my interpretation. But we're gonna start with Polly. And I think that of the three, she is Joy. So Polly Apfelbaum is really famous for fallen paintings. This is largely because she often places her work on the floor. She seeks her work to be beautiful and intuitive, but that turn out to be more complex. So something that a viewer can enter in, is seduced by, and then the more time that you spend with the object, the more that you realize that it's incredibly complex and layered. So this is a piece called Reckless. It's from '98. And what you're looking at are stained synthetic velvet that she's hand stained and hand cut, and has pieced together and layered on the floor. So I'm assuming that some of you have already been going through some of the docent materials that are on the website, so you have some familiarity with the work, which is great. And so yeah, like a fallen painting, something that was once hanging up on the wall that sort of took a dive and spilled everywhere. It's got this sort of glorious spill, magnified cellular form, stain. It looks like it's biomorphic, it looks like it's moving, and it has these incredibly intricate components, even though the initial view is this sort of like, bang, this big, beautiful, colorful thing.
Does that poster, where my eyes are going, is that a post? And is that meant to be there, or is that a post in the building? What is that? What is that?
Oh, it's a column that's part of the building. So one of the things that that Polly and really all of the artists that we're going to look at do very well is work with the inherent architectures or idiosyncrasies of a building. So rather than place and install the work elsewhere, Polly instead embraces the fact that there's a column and works around that.
Why didn't she put it on the opposite side then? I know, but I wanted her.
Well, that you can ask Polly yourself.
Thank you.
Why she chose that side over that side, I don't know.
Well, it instigates conversation.
But it's a walkway, it goes around, so you can see.
What's up, Larry?
Is the piece on the wall?
A Pollock? Yes.
Yes.
That's a piece from the whatever permanent collection.
Yes.
And the same thing is going to be done here. These artists will pick a piece or pieces from our permanent collection.
Yes, they will be curating part of the show.
And
Yeah.
those have been chosen already.
Woo.
I'm not sure. I think the artists are still in the process of installing and working that out. The specifics of the show itself, you're going to get the rundown with the artists while you're there.
I have a question. So, Polly chose that painting on the wall.
No, she didn't.
She did.
This was in the show.
So my question is, that painting was on the wall, Polly came in, and that column was there, and she decided to put her artwork on the floor in that particular position.
Yes.
And, okay, so there's no relationship artistically between what's on the floor and what's on the wall.
There's a curatorial relationship between what's on the floor and on the wall. Certainly
That's
she,
my
yeah.
question.
Okay.
Okay, so there's going to be some, okay. It's not random.
This is another piece by her called Blossom, again, synthetic cut velvet, and you'll see that she does the same thing. There's this wacky little corner that turns in. Why it's like that, who knows? But rather than fighting with that, Polly instead chooses to embrace it by moving in. And then I also love that she left this tiny little overhang on the left, which is just this like cute little idiosyncrasy. No, she lays them down.
Is this piece just specific to the given exhibition as she lays it out on the floor, or would she repeat it in another exhibition?
A lot of them she tries to, So a lot of them she tries to make site specific. In fact, all of the artists that are in the show work in a really site specific, or as Tony would say, site determined manner. But that being said, it is a movable, so each little petal, you could call it, is not glued together or tacked together. She does have the ability to move things. And she's got another piece that's kind of like this, which is just a full circle.
Now, is that synthetic velvet as well?
Yeah.
What was the question? Is that synthetic velvet as well?
I was thinking especially with
This is a piece called Miss America. And this is the other side to the same coin when it comes to these fabric pieces on the floor. So whereas on the one hand, Polly will sometimes work with these incredibly intricate, small, hand-dyed, hand-cut materials, she also uses, what the art world refers to as found art. In this case, it's a bolt of fabric that she has purchased and laid out that has this iridescent technicolor quality that she has paired with what I think is kind of a funny title. It's called Miss America, as you can see. And she really plays with that. She plays with the craft, the handmade, the thing that is labored and toiled over. But then on the other hand, we'll also find something and install it that has a similar complexity, but a much simpler installation. This is another piece that's a fabric on the floor. In this case, she hand cut each of them and laid them out. They're sequined fabric. One of the things that you'll notice with all of the artists in the show is they love color, they love glitter. There's gonna be a lot of sparkle, a lot of fluorescence, lots of,
So there is glitter going.
I think so. I don't know if it'll be used for this particular installation, but for our show, but all of them at some point or another, to them, all of these are on the same playing field. The material and the materiality of the show, and I think our show, is going to be really pronounced because that's something that all three of them have a real attachment to. This is a piece called Feelies, and they are plasticine and sculpey that have not been baked. So she's using this, again, kids' craft material that she's putting together to create these little flat, square-like structures. They're really bright and colorful, and it's very important to her that they're not baked, that they retain some of this inherent vulnerability, that they remain flexible, that there's something that can alternate and change, that they remain in this stasis of having potential. So regarding titles, you may have noticed up to this point, as looking at some of the slides, that Polly uses some pretty interesting titles. This is Dwarves Without Snow White, there was Miss America, Reckless, Blossom, Feelies. It's a really broad range of titles, and they come from a number of sources. So oftentimes they come from books, but they also come from band names, like, musical groups, nursery rhymes, film titles, fragments of conversation. And titling is another way in which these three artists share some similarity. They all have these unusual, ephemeral, slightly referencing, kind of clue-like titles that ultimately don't give anything away, but do pique some interest and have a little bit of mystery for them. Feelies, and I can't confirm this because I haven't been able to find Polly speaking about this to get it from her words, but I don't know how many of you have read Brave New World, but so there's a scene when the characters go to the movies, and the movies are called the Feelies. So I can't wait to ask her if that's where that's from, because that to me is like, oh, that was a clue, and maybe I got it. So we'll see. These are the color revolts. So again, there's that raw clay compound and then glitter and pigment that she piles on top of each of them. They're precarious, fleeting, ephemeral. I mean, a gust of wind could come and blow them away. And that's, I think, a big part of this work. Color revolts comes from a Victorian novel called Flatland. In this novel, which is about a two-dimensional world, there is a revolt led by the women of the society called the Color Revolt. And this is where she has chosen that title. So again, these kind of obscure literary references that she's using but isn't necessarily being super faithful to. It's not that this piece is necessarily about that novel. It's just a part of the language and part of the fabric of everything else that is woven into the work. This is called HWP, and it's named after the Hand Weaver's Pattern book. I guess it's a popular craft book. I'm not familiar with it personally. But naming it after a book, suddenly what happens is all of the different cloths that are on the wall become like pages. So now it's a book that's been laid bare and placed on the wall. It's also kind of unusual to see her put something on the wall. Which is, I think, a pretty funny and interesting thing about Polly is that she's created a career where it becomes unusual for her to hang something on the wall. That to me is it's very charming.
Is the color I'm seeing on the floor part of her show? Or
No, so the floor is just the wood. What you are seeing are these little strings with these small beads that she hangs from the ceiling.
Okay.
And those are kind of to give you pathway and access through the space. So it kind of helps maneuver how you navigate the room. That is another backstory to how she works. She is interested in how we as viewers operate within her space. I'll explain that a little bit more when I get to one of her rugs, which has a very direct way to enter the space. But she used fabric markers and again synthetic velvet and these little small square stencils. So you'll notice that each one is comprised of these small squares that she's laid over and then painted with this fabric marker that stains the fabric. And she used like some obscene amount of color, like there's over 200 different pigments in this particular work. She also experiments with printmaking. This piece is called Love Alley. It was done at Durham Press in Philadelphia. Each shape is cut by hand and hand inked. So that's what the making of it looked like. So you see this bed with all of the different hand-cut elements that are painted, and then the I think it's a kind of cloth that is laid over and then rolled through and pressed. So this is the last slide of Polly that I'm going to show you, and it's called Evergreen Blue Shoes, and this was earlier this year. I don't know how many of you have been to the Burlington Center for the Arts in Vermont, but that's where it was installed. It was installed this spring and I think came down mid-June. So in it, we've got 2 of her carpets. And we are going to have carpets similar to this in the show. She has them made in Oaxaca, Mexico, and they are there woven, dyed by hand by the crew there that works at the shop. What you'll notice is that there are 2 footprints. I don't know how well you can see them. So there are 2 footprints And you know when you're learning how to dance and there's those mats that have the footprints on them? So they kind of look like that. For this particular piece, it's the first time where she is allowing someone to walk on the work, which I think we'll get here, as I said. You have to take off your shoes and wear socks, but you can then walk, and because she's got the 2 footprints there, you're invited to take a foot, put a foot, and stand in the space the way that she wants to. So when I was talking about how she has some particular ways for how she wants you to engage the work, I think it's pretty explicit in this one. She did a Google search for the word green, and one of the things that she found was this California band called Evergreen Blue Shoes. So the wallpaper that you're seeing is the album art for the band. And it's kind of perfect that this show was happening in Vermont. So a lot of you know Vermont, big proponent of the Back to the Lander movement. Lots of hippies have gone there to, like, I don't know, be in the land and grow up and have children and be the organic belt of this country in terms of food, etc. Go to Vermont, it's a really cool place. But it's interesting that she's chosen to install this in Vermont with that kind of, you know, alternative counterculture history that it has. And she's taken the album art, which has, you know, what can only be nicely described as naked dancing hippies in the meadow, and that's what it looks like. If you can pull up an image of it online, and it's just these like happy young people who are nude and holding hands and spinning. It's also the first time, at least that I've seen in the research I've been doing for her, where she's incorporating a figure. That to me is big news. I have a feeling that she is thinking about it as a pattern. But one of the questions that I have for her is how she sees that entering the work, because I think that's a pretty jarring change from what we've seen from her so far. There's a really wonderful, it's an hour-long video of a talk she did with the University of Vermont students, and it's in this gallery, and everyone is sitting cross-legged on the rugs while she's talking. If you're interested in more about her, I think it's a good one to watch, even though it's kind of long. Okay. Tony, who I am associating with wonder from the Beauty, Wonder, Joy. So if Polly is joy, I think Tony is wonder. He's got a way of looking and thinking that really drives the work. He has an infinite curiosity, using the detritus of everyday life, the interesting qualities of objects, and the inherent abilities and potential of those objects. Sometimes the work is very spare and minimal, but frequently it's related to assembly, repetition, collections, things that are aggregated over time. This is a piece called Just So, and one of the things that's really interesting about Tony and everything that I've read about him, there's always someone at some point, or him himself, who says, well, it is what it is. And it's a phrase which we use in our lexicon and our kind of colloquial culture pretty often, but for Tony it really means something, because it is what it is. He doesn't want you to look at it and see anything else other than these bottles that are filled with colored water, and that's what they are, and there's no secret that that's what they are. Yet, there's this transformative experience that happens. So it's like he's drawing with water. It's like a wave that he's managed to make that is now frozen in this stasis. There's a real poetic and elegant sensibility that his work has. Those are just marbles. Everything that he finds, everything that he uses in his installations are found objects, most of them found in New York. He used to live in the Bowery, but then got priced out, and now he's got a studio in the Bronx. But for years, he lived in the Bowery area, and everything that he found and that was used in the work came from him walking and finding things that he found on the ground, collecting them over time. I've seen this one little tiny picture from a lecture that he gave that I watched, where it's just a photograph that he took facing downward with his feet, and there's just trash everywhere, and he's like, well, that's my house. He's really into collecting, and things build over years and eventually find their home in an installation. This piece is called All In. It catches the light, it looks like fabric, but it's a group of marbles. How he's able to do that, I think, is it's pretty amazing.
Is it on the wall or is it
on the floor? This is a view from his retrospective, a recent retrospective that he did. So the piece that you see on the bottom right is called Charadient, and they are mops. They're just mop heads, not mop heads, mop sticks, mop handles, thank you, that have been threaded through with a piece of cord in the middle. Tony really loves TV. It's kind of a guilty pleasure for him. And while he was watching the Jenny Jones talk show, there was a character on the show, not a character, I guess kind of a character, but there was a guest on the show who was talking about how some man had wronged her, and her name happened to be Charadient, which he just loved. If you watch talks with him online, and I'm sure this will come up when he's here, he often says, oh, it was beautiful. And that was one of his responses to that name. So that's where that comes from. But it becomes a star, it's a pinwheel, it's an iris, it's really mutable, has a lot of interpretation. But again, it's no secret that they are broom handles. There's no mystery there. Next to it, you'll see a table called Take It Up with Tut from 2008. And those are kind of like, so in his apartment, he'll have these tables laid out that he just puts objects on, that he finds, that he likes, that he thinks are interesting, and over time, they become these tablescapes/cityscapes. And this is one of them. So the objects on that table probably range from like 20 years of collection. And then the ones in the back it's called Enjoy, and they're Coca-Cola crates that he's scratched the name off. Again, all found in the city. He talks a lot about how New York got cleaned up and how he didn't have materials anymore. So, and to go back to this idea about him finding all these things in the street, he really sees himself as a landscape artist. Landscape in the sense of being part of an incredibly dense and urban environment. And he refers to it as gathering objects like shells on a beach, which I think is really lovely.
Another question? So from what you just said, it sounds as though his collecting itself is really his art as much as the arrangement.
Absolutely. For all of the artists, process is key. How the work gets made, the process of it collecting, and how, for Polly, it's cutting these things out, dyeing them, assembling them, laying them out, coming to a space. For Tony, it's about being in an environment, gathering these things off the street, putting them together, being invited to come into a museum, which has happened several times. He's world-renowned. And then putting those two things together. For Carrie Moyer, as we'll see, it's about layering, because she's mostly a painter, but it's about layering of surface and how these things build over time. So for all three of them, process is super, super important. This is from the same retrospective. It's called Wishing Well Wishes Well. And this is an example of him working with the site. So the museum said, we can give you this portion of the museum, what are you going to do? And he works with these plastic bottles filled with liquid often, and just did this very spare and kind of simple installation. He really seeks to incorporate the architecture. so that when you're viewing the work, rather than having this experience of the work is here and you're here, you really feel like you're inside the installation. And you can't really tell there, but I've watched some interviews with the curator for this show, and she talked about how during certain times of day the light would change and they would hit through the colors in the different bottles, and you just have these prisms on the facing wall. So very simple gesture, but totally transformative. This is another installation he did. It's called A Little Bird Told Me. It's part of the Public Art Fund. It was a group show called Everyday Eden. And his installation was at the Metrotech Commons in Brooklyn. And the installations, especially the ones that he does outside, are, and I think the ones inside too, are partly to help you see. So in this case, it's to help you see the tree. To help you see what you probably take for granted. In something like this one, called Carl Sagan Destination 2 at the Ulrich Museum in Wichita, from a show called Extraordinary Ordinary, which I think is a pretty smart title to apply to a lot of Tony's work. He really wants you to see the line of that branch. And the Ulrich Museum is in Wichita University, I forget which university exactly, but he installed these throughout the entire campus. So there are moments when you're standing and you see this line of fluorescent orange bottles. I think he's doing something fluorescent orange here, which would be totally within character. But you'll notice again, so back to this idea about titles, and I mentioned all of our artists having some interest in titles. Carl Sagan, Destination 2, what? Like, Tony loves TV, so you might remember a show called Cosmos, and this is partly where he's pulled that title from. He just has an interest in and a fascination with the science of the natural world. And his interventions, you could call them, point to that. In this case, it's the total elegance of how that branch moves across the space. Tony was also in Oaxaca. He was at the Museo de los Pintores Oaxaqueños, and that's the Museum of Painters. And he was invited to do an installation there. And these are all made using blue painter's tape. So he does these to various windows. Let me give you a... So he just takes blue painter's tape, cuts them, attaches them, and creates these rather exquisite patterns.
Are the artists friends, and have they ever exhibited together before?
They have definitely exhibited together. You pull up their CVs and you see a lot of like, oh, you were in a show with Tony in 2007. You were,
So they're good friends.
I think, well, I don't know if they're good friends. They're certainly, they are, that's cool. They're certainly colleagues.
Yeah.
And according to Kim, yes, they are good friends. Is this the first time they're all showing together? Because I've seen a lot of two of them showing, and then two of them, I don't know that I haven't like picked through their CVs, sort of. But most of what I noticed was that it was 2 and 2. I think it's pretty exciting if this is the first time where all three are gonna be in the same space. I hope that that's the case. Does this with various windows, has been invited to various places in the world to do that. He likes to block out windows. When he has an installation, he gets really frustrated when the viewers who are in a gallery space are looking outside. He wants them to be inside, so he will block out windows or do these sort of like visual tricks to get or to pull shutters down or whatever it is, because for him it's very important that not only are you in the space when you're in the space, but that you're also inward when you're in the space. That it becomes a more reflective, a more introspective zone. And those incredible washes of blue that these particular ones give just create this amazing aura, and again, really transformative. This is called Untitled. It's from an exhibition he did at Pace called Next Online. Pace reps him, or is one of their reps, and it's clear vinyl tubing that's filled with water and food coloring. Again, he's drawing with water, but it's very important that he's not trying to draw something specific, but that he's allowing the thing to do what it does. So what does plastic tubing do? All of us are familiar with garden hoses. They naturally entwine themselves. They're just out to annoy us. But they naturally do that. That's the character of the material. And it's really important for him that the character of the material is retained. In all of the hanging bottle installations, for instance, he really loves the fact that when you tie a string to a bottle and you hang it, that the bottle naturally tilts. It's just gonna do that. He could screw a hole into the top and he could do all kinds of things to make them hang perfectly. But it's really important for him that the object get to be the object. And that it get to be this thing which, although maybe is small or garbage or actually has a life and has a lot of potential. See, he loves fluorescence, bright color. This is a piece called Albuquerque Landing. It was at the Bronx Museum of Art. And the Bronx Museum, he was having a show there, and they said, we've got this plot of land, do you want to do something with it? And he looked at it, and again he said, oh, it's beautiful, and then talked about how it was this Martian moonscape and how he was really drawn to it, and he wasn't sure what he could do to make it more beautiful, except paint it fluorescent pink. Which he did do, and he's really interested in fluorescence, about, like, I don't know, I didn't take notes on this part, but how our eye perceives fluorescent colors, like color wavelengths, and how fluorescence is really unique in that. You'll have to ask him about it specifically to answer it in a much more clear manner. But again, that fascination with the natural world, fascination with science, is part of why he's really interested in fluorescence. This is a piece called Long-Term Pillow. For all the artists, for Polly and for Tony, you may have noticed I'm not showing you things in a chronological order. I don't think that for this work is particularly important. Carrie's will be in chronology because I think that there's a lot that gets revealed when you put that in an order. So for Tony, I'm ending with some really early work of his. And it's to give you a little bit of perspective about who he is as an artist. There's not much of the personal, or at least the truly personal or the autobiographical that appears in Tony's work. However, Long-Term Pillow is, as he put it, I was decorating for my funeral. It's about memorializing. Tony is HIV positive. He has witnessed, is coming out of the era when so many people died. And he's someone who sees himself as a survivor, who made it through, but who has countless friends who did not. So he was thinking about, like, what if I don't have more than 10 years to live? What does that mean? What is the point of that? And a lot of these really heavy questions that I think, any of us would have to confront, both as we get older, but also if we have to deal with some sort of debilitating health issue.
How large is that?
I think it's like really big. It's not large. So this last piece is called Penny Piece, 1995 to present. And every penny in there, so it's a penny for every year and from every year that Tony has been alive. So when he was asking, what is the value of a life? And in his opinion, in this country, not much. So he chose the penny. The shelf is specific because it's designed to be the timeline of the person in his family who has lived the longest. And he talks about this, and he talks about it a little bit, but some of it's online, where he says how grateful he is that he keeps getting to add a penny, because so many of his friends don't have it But that's older work. He doesn't talk about it that much, but I think that it really, I mean, I could be just imagining, but I think that it really has an impact on how he sees the world, and how the quotidian for him becomes something that's really magnificent. Yeah. All right, Carrie. So, Carrie Moyer. If Polly is joy, and I think Tony is wonder, then I think Carrie is beauty. So,
He said Polly was beauty.
no, Polly's joy, Tony's wonder, Carrie's beauty. This is just my interpretation. But I'm making it very clear that that's just how I think about it. Because although I definitely think the exhibition and the artists in it incorporate all three of these traits, I think if you have three graces and each one has a character, for me it's no doubt that Polly's joy, Tony's wonder, and that Carrie's beauty, even though that definitely cross-pollinates. So I'm going to start with her earlier work, as I said. So she's the only artist that I'm showing you with chronology, because I think it really makes sense here. Thinking about Carrie Moyer, it's important to know the various roles and how active she is in a number of different fields. She's an artist, activist, writer, teacher, designer. She's incredibly prolific, and for the majority of her artist career has been working largely in painting. Moyers creates layering, depth, transparency, atmosphere through glazing, these pours that she does, gesso pours, staining, and yet they also have this really strong graphic element. And they've been primarily working in the realm of abstraction. When it comes to abstraction, she really wrestles with some pretty big art historical questions, and things that have been brought up again in art history, and in how we think about the role of abstract painting now, and it's the role that it possessed then when it was current. Can abstraction be about figures? Can abstraction grapple with social issues and social involvement? Can painting in general do these things? In fact, for a while she stopped painting. So for about 6 years she stopped, and this was probably right out of undergrad. She wasn't sure it was what she wanted to do. She kind of thought that maybe it was too bourgeoisie. And she wasn't sure that painting could address all the social issues that were really important to her. And she's been, as I said, a very active activist in particularly queer and feminist issues for many, many years. So she went into design and did that for a while. And the design had a big influence in a lot of the wheat pasting and posters that she was doing with the sort of activist work. But she comes back to painting. And we're not going to look at the earliest, but she comes back with this piece called Chromafesto. And here you can see a lot of these sort of graphic design influences and how she's putting those two things together. We see references to logos, to text. If you're not familiar, Emma Goldman is an anarchist and activist. So that's her floating bust kind of obscured in the background. She also uses communist heroes in some of the work from this period. This is called Psychogeographic Landscape, version 2. Again, with these sort of symbols. This is called Dispatch from 2005, and she did a few canvases where she was really thinking about and looking at Russian constructivism. So you see some of the tail signs of Russian propaganda imagery, that bold red, white, and black, but also other colors that are there. For this one specifically, she was, quote, thinking about the gramophone, the machine, the megaphone above all else, grappling with these issues surrounding power. A lot of the earlier reviews of her work talk about how those very questions that she originally had that made her step away from painting, can abstraction grapple with social issues, etc. And the reviews that she received said, yeah, like she's doing it, and she's doing it really well. And I think that, that gave her a boost to maybe keep going. This is called Old Flame. And here we find her thinking about prehistoric art, about the body, about the history of painting. This is one where this is part of the previous one, but I love this quote where she says, where she's thinking about an imagined feminist take on the birth of painting, of what that would look like. So here are some of her politics kind of creeping in, like what does the history of art look like if we had included everybody? Like what would be made, what would be valued, how would that change? And they're pretty powerful questions, and pretty beautiful paintings. This one's called Freeze, and she was looking at warrior masks, like other ancient art, thinking about how to depict the body but as loosely as possible, or how to suggest the body. And suggestions of the body are something that she's really pushed forward, as you'll see. They become more and more abstract, and yet the references are still there. So this is a piece called Violet and Bone. And the white part that you see, I told you we were getting there. So the white part that you see is poured gesso. She, and as the rest of our artists, is really motivated by process. So sometimes it's important for her to use anything but the brush, like anything else. Her elbow, her arm, pouring, moving, like other objects, just not the brush. But how does she make these? So unlike previous artists working in this kind of all-over color field manner, she stretches her canvases beforehand. So she doesn't take bolts of canvas and then work on it and then cut them out later. She stretches everything beforehand. And the canvas is unprimed, and then she holding it, and they're really large, so it's like an awkward operation where she's holding it and maneuvering them around to do pours. She goes back and forth working on them, putting the canvas on the ground, then putting it back on the wall, and going vertical, horizontal, back and forth, back and forth. She really manipulates and works the entire surface. And many of these sort of graphic decisions are done early. So when we think about abstraction, and we often think about an intuitive process, which is well and good, this isn't really the case here. All of them, or most of them, start with these small, quick black and white collages that she uses as reference points, and then once the painting gets going, she kind of discards it and makes other decisions based on that. But they're not arbitrary, like nothing about the work is arbitrary. She will sometimes go through several canvases before finding one where she's able to get the thing that she wants to get. So they're very planned, which I think is something that's pretty interesting here. Also uses things like glitter, staining, washes, mostly through acrylic, as I said, gesso. And the slides really don't do them justice, kind of like the Susan Roth exhibition that we just took down, seeing them in a slide or in a book, totally different than the experience you have when you actually see them in person. That layering, all of the build-up, all of the change, the iridescence, it just doesn't come through. Is this the right one? Yes. This is called Hong Kong Garden. I don't know how many of you are Susie and the Banshee fans, punk rock band, but anyway, this is where the title comes from. And like the other artists, as I said, Carrie is using titles in an amorphous, ephemeral, fragmented, pulled together way from books, from bands, from songs, fragments of conversation, people that she's met, and they're all part of, as I said, that fabric of the work itself. They're not necessarily what the work is about or a reference, but they're another part of the dialogue. They're another piece to the puzzle. And we see a lot of really sensual forms. So again, the references to the body are becoming more subtle. You know, this one's what? That one's 2012. So we've got, like 5 or 6 years of her painting, and you'll see them progress as they become more and more abstract. You'll also notice these elements of black that are in the painting. And in addition to being really graphic, they also function partly to take the viewer to a modernist reference. So by that I mean like Motherwell or Klein, or she wants you to have that reference. She wants you to look at the work and think about what you see, but to also think about the history of abstract expressionism. And they function to bring you there. She's very, very aware, and she's written about it extensively, really well, about who she's in dialogue with in art history. You know, she knows what shoulders she's standing on, and what she's taking from them, and also what she's pushing forward, like what her own agendas as an artist are. Stephen Mueller, Helen Frankenthaler, these are all huge influences. The way they account for every access in a painting, how every part and every surface is dealt with. They did it in a more intuitive manner, they were the ones working with rolls of canvas, moving around, and one of the ways that Carrie does it differently is this planning, at least when it comes to process. Color field painters. I love the title of this one. It's Damn Everything But the Circus. And it's based on a Sister Carita quote. Sister Carita was a Catholic nun who also made these pretty radical graphics in the 60s, and she eventually became a designer. Now, you might know her work if you know the love stamp, the postage stamp. That's Sister Carita. And I don't know what the context of her saying this is, but apparently she once said, "Damn everything but the circus," which I just think is really great. But again, the piece isn't about Sister Carita. It's about pulling together these various elements. They become part of the fabric of what is going on. Carrie has said, abstract expressionism is not about depicting feelings. It's about creating a language to get across ideas. I'm going to caveat that by saying I think that that's what ABEX is for her, but a very popular notion in art history, and we know that from the talk that we had for the Edward Root Show, is that it is about the inward space and that it is about feelings. So this is another place where Carrie is working with a particular history, but has a totally different relationship with it. So the work becomes more abstract, more fluid, lyrical. Her paintings seem to move, they seem to dance, which is kind of interesting because Carrie studied to be a dancer as a young woman, but after a serious accident, she was no longer able to dance, and then moved into working with visual art. And that's very recent work. Yeah, and there's this sensual element to it. She works with these really morphic forms. There's a hint of the body. All of the work now has these subtle, some are a little more explicit, but most of them have this kind of subtle hint to the body. And what's interesting in watching the progression of her work is she becomes more and more confident in the work itself and less reliant on visual cues or signifiers to convey meaning. This isn't a super unique thing to Carrie. I think all artists go through this process, but it's pretty fascinating to watch the work become more and more abstract, but also more refined and more honed in as she really starts to talk about, I think, the things that matter very much to her as an artist. I wanted to show you some of her activist work. She was part of a co-founder of a group called DAM, which stands for Dyke Action Machine, which she co-founded in '91. I think they finally disbanded in 2008. But they were a public art collective raising issues about queer identity, feminism, and they would paste these posters around New York. This is a more recent one that she did, referencing these sort of alternative culture heroes. Okay, so that's Carrie. So these are our artists. Color, focus on material, process, the push and pull between complexity and simplicity, filling and utilizing the structure and architecture of a space, quiet, unnoticeable engagements with the personal or autobiographical, but that nonetheless have some strong currents in the work, unique titles that cast a wide net of references, boldness, immersion, and I think hopefully it's going to be a really wonderful experience for the people who visit and for our community.
Thank you.